Welcome to this evening's webinar entitled The Generation That Will Return Global Youth Roundtable, which is the third event of the Palestinian Return Centre's second annual Return Week, which seeks to mobilize Palestinians and our allies around the world to call for and support the Palestinian right of return. I'm your host, Betul Sabeti. Today's event is an online panel discussion where we will be hearing from our very strong and inspirational Palestinian heroines, Janna Jihad, Nerdine Kiswani, Mariam Afifi, and Enas Ghannam. I want us to begin with a very brief introduction to the significance of the right of return. The right of return signifies the correction of the course of justice, not just for Palestinians, but to the whole world, because denying Palestinians the right to return means ultimately legitimizing the rape and occupation of another people's land and its process of violence through massacres, theft, and oppression of the worst kind. Therefore, on a primary level, the right of return isn't simply about securing the right of the Palestinians, but this will bring about humanity's right to not exceed the boundaries of human rights. In the case there is no right to return, the biggest shame, that is the theft of Palestine, will remain in the conscience of the world. If there is no right to return, human values will be reduced to nothing. They will be stripped of their weight. This is because the temporary and the narrow interests of the world powers to create a state at the detriment of another people is occurring at the expense of principles and values. And when values are reduced to nothing and there is no accountability, that is the recipe for arrogant powers to repeat the aggression and to get away with it. The shame that is occurring in Palestine needs to be reversed, and the first step towards this is the right of return. Without this reverse and granting the right, the whole of humanity will suffer. Now, just a little bit about the Maritime Campaign. It's a popular voluntary initiative that was launched by the London-based Palestinian Return Centre in cooperation with national and international pro-Palestinian partners. The campaign was launched in Jordan in cooperation with the Palestine Committee in the Jordanian Parliament. The campaign culminates in a petition that calls for and reaffirms the Palestinian right of return and seeks to turn such an inalienable right into an international cause. The campaign seeks to garner the largest possible number of signatures on a petition confirming Palestinian refugees' devotion to their right of return. The petition clearly states that it rejects the US deal of the century and any other initiative undermining Palestinians' internationally guaranteed rights. The occupying regime and the US have never ceased to undermine such an inalienable right by denying the refugee status of displaced Palestinians inside and outside of occupied Palestine. The former US President Trump's recognition of occupied Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the campaign waged by Israel and the US against UNRWA, the US suspension and its funding of Palestinian refugees, and the increase in calls to resettle the refugees in destinations other than Palestine are tactics which, though seemingly divergent, they all aim for the same goal, and that is undermining the right of return. The right of return will never be negotiated with or used as a bargaining chip. And even if the whole world abandons this inalienable right, it will stay alive in the hearts and actions of people who carry its conviction and will never abandon it. So in reality, the Palestinians are closer than ever to achieving their comeback, and history's turn will impose the truth, even if it's after a while and after a struggle. This campaign is based on individual signatures on the My Return petition through its official website, www.myreturn.net. The petition has already garnered over 1 million signatures, so please do sign it now. Before introducing our speakers, if you do have any questions you would like our speakers to answer, then please do leave them in the comments section and the speakers will answer them in the Q&A at the end. Now to introduce our first speaker, we have the lovely Janna Jihad. Janna Jihad is an activist and is known for being the world's youngest journalist. A resident of the Nabi Saleh village in occupied Palestine, Janna regularly participates in demonstrations against the Israeli occupation. She began making videos of what was happening in her village, from Israeli occupation to illegal settlement building, when she was only 7. She's a personal heroine of mine. I'm so excited to welcome you, Janna.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here talking to you guys.
Welcome, Janna. Would you like to start off the discussion on the importance and the significance of the right of return?
Yeah, of course, for sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm actually extremely honored to have been given this opportunity to speak about our lives as Palestinian people living under the Israeli occupation and our ongoing suffering since that has started in the Nakba and is still ongoing and continuing due to the fact that we are still living under this occupation and have been living for the past 73 years under all these forms of apartheid and settler colonialism. Um, so I think most of us know what happened in the Nakba in 1948, which was when the Israeli occupation and the Zionist organizations decided to occupy Palestine. They massacred people, demolished houses and entire Palestinian villages. They forcefully displaced over 750,000 Palestinian people to soon become refugees all around the world, living in extremely bad situations in refugee camps. And the situation of the Palestinian refugees all over the world is extremely bad, especially the Palestinian refugees here in Palestine, which I will actually be highlighting. Since the Palestinian refugees that are in Palestine create a huge percentage of the Palestinian population living in historical Palestine, and we actually call them internally displaced people. And it's extremely hard because they have been displaced. They are living in refugee camps, and the refugee camps here in Palestine, in the West Bank, in Gaza, are tiny spaces with literal maybe tens of thousands of people living in tiny houses, barely have any water, have any electricity. They suffer from so many different issues, and it's also extremely hard from the aspect where you could just imagine a Palestinian person who was displaced from Jaffa and is now living in a refugee camp from Ramallah. Living in a refugee camp from Ramallah, which is a Palestinian city that is only a couple kilometers away from Jaffa, for example. You can literally sometimes see the Mediterranean Sea in Jaffa from the rooftop of your house. You are literally a couple kilometers away from the village that you originally was displaced from, and the apartheid wall is only the only thing that's actually separating you, but you cannot go and have not been able to actually to return to your houses or return to your villages that you was forcefully displaced from since the 1948. I could talk about so many of my personal stories regarding like old people that I've personally met, the grandmas of my friends. I'm personally not a refugee, but as I said, the internally displaced people in Palestine create a huge percentage of the Palestinian population. So going to my friends' houses and meeting their grandmas and their grandfathers and their family members, it's always the first stories that they would always tell us is the stories of how they were living in their villages in the 1948 occupied areas before the occupation, or what happened during the Nakba. And one time we actually went to to my friend Anan's house. He's a refugee, actually originally from Beit Nabala, which is a Palestinian village that is in the 1948 areas, and his family was displaced from there and was is now forcefully living in a refugee camp near Ramallah called the Jalazon refugee camp. And if you know the Jalazon refugee camp, it's literally like, if you've ever been there, it's like one of the worst refugee camps you could ever go to. They live in extremely bad situations. And one time, me and a couple of our friend group just went to his house to listen to his grandma. She's probably in her mid 80s now, and she was just telling us about her life before the Nakba, how they used to wake up. They had big houses with with water wells in front of them. They used to go get water in the morning, and how they had cattle. They used to go to there was a mountain in their village where there was a taboon, which is the place where Palestinian women used to actually make Palestinian taboon bread, which is our traditional type of bread. They used to always go there in the morning and do that. And then in the 1948 and during the Nakba, so many massacres were happening all around the villages around them, and so many stories and so many stuff were being heard, and so many news was being heard by the people of Beit Nabala of the fact that the Israeli and the Zionist organizations that are committing all these crimes and killing all these people and burning mosques and houses with people in them were actually coming to the village. So they were actually very scared, which caused them to actually fled, knowing that they are on their way to come to their village, Beit Nabala. And her name was Yusra. I remember she was Teta Yusra, and she was like, yeah, I woke up in the morning. She was probably 12 years old or something around that age, and she went to the mountain to start. She made her bread dough, and she wanted to go make taboon bread, and she was in the middle of her bread making in the taboon, and then all her family just ran to her and was like, yalla, just take whatever you have, and we have to flee because the Israeli organizations are on their way to come here. So she just took nothing, and she said, I left my bread in the taboon and just fled, thinking that they're gonna just leave for a couple of days, maybe a week, and then come back to their houses. They literally took nothing with them, and she said they fled to a village called Dir Balut, and in Dir Balut they were waiting for a week, a month, a year, and she said this one sentence. It was we thought it was a week, now it's 73 years. And now we are living in a Jarazon camp, and we are living off of the UN, the food that's given to us by the UN. We've been living on that, and all the difficult things that they have to deal with because of that. And she is in her mid-80s, but have been always dreaming of going back to Beit Nabala. And the way she was even talking to us, the way she still had hopes, the way her key was literally put in a necklace on her neck, and her just literally visualizing and knowing every single detail of her house, and remembering every single detail of her friends and how they were playing, was just extremely wonderful to us. And another old lady, I have a friend, his name is Tariq al-Bakri, which is he's a researcher from Jerusalem. You guys should actually check him out. He talks a lot about Palestinian refugees and tries to do research on Palestinian villages and destroyed villages and all that. So at a certain point, he made a video about one old lady called Halime. She's also from Beit Nabala, and during the video, you can actually she was 83 at the time, where he was able to take her for the first time since she left her village during the Nakba. And now she's 83, and he was able to take her for the first time after that to visit Beit Nabala. And you can see how she was remembering everything. She was just smelling the soil. She said, this is my house. This is the well I used to come get water from. And it's just very beautiful. And I think we can actually imagine how the next generations are actually raised. I mean, I could talk about the generation after them, the sons and daughters of these old ladies, which are the second generation after the Nakba, which are technically our parents. This generation was, I would say, a revolutionary generation in the history of Palestine, considering the fact that they lived in extremely bad conditions, but they were raised on the hopes of all of our grandparents who were always hoping of returning and never giving up. And actually, Teta Yusra at a certain point during our setting, when we were talking to her from in the Jalazon refugee camp, she said this word where this quote where she said "ما بتموت دانة وراهم طالب," meaning that no right dies if there are people demanding for it. And just thinking that our parents were raised on that makes so much sense, that they are the generation of the intifadas. And actually, you know, speaking of that, today actually marks the 34th year of the first intifada, which is the uprising. And being raised by this generation is also revolutionary for us as the third generation after the Nakba, because we are the third generation after the Nakba that are still living in this ongoing Nakba. We are living in, I would even say, worse situation than all the other generations before us. We are living in literal tiny pieces that are called Palestine, tiny pieces of the West Bank, surrounded by expanding Israeli settlements, illegal Israeli settlements that are expanding by the day. I mean, if I want to talk about my village, Nabi Saleh, we have the Israeli illegal settlement of Halmish that is literally expanding by the day. They're literally building more houses and more houses. Every time I wake up and look out of the window, there's literally more buildings getting built. And all that is being built by annexing more of our land and stealing more of our land. And now 62%, over 62% of the West Bank is actually just made up of Israeli illegal settlements that, or even Area C, which is technically, because the West Bank is divided into certain areas, Area C is the stolen land. And even thinking of that, a lot of, even like in Nabi Saleh, 70% of Nabi Saleh is Area C. And just imagine, Nabi Saleh is an extremely tiny village, and 70% of it being Area C means that in this areas you cannot build, sometimes you cannot even go into your land, regardless of the fact that you have papers proving that it is your land. And this is also a form of ethnic cleansing and a form of silent displacement, as we call it, because our generation, if a person wants to get married and they think of building their own life, they want to build a house, they don't have any land other than the land that is Area C, since it makes up a huge percentage of their land, but they are not allowed to build there. If they build there, the Israeli occupation has the right to just go demolish anything they do in that land. So they are forced to either go to the city and leave that land for the Israeli occupation to annex, because they technically cannot do anything about it, or literally leave the country because the Israeli occupation affects every single aspect of their lives. We live in this Palestine. We live in these tiny pieces. We are the generation that was raised on not being afraid. We are the generation that was raised on raised on the novels of Ghassan Kanafani. Ghassan Kanafani is returning to Haifa's books were the literal first novels that I've ever read in my life. We were raised on our grandmas and grandparents' stories about the Nakba and about their hosts. We were raised seeing the keys on their necks. We are the generation that are actually using different methods to resist, which is actually extremely beautiful, seeing what has been actually happening during the past couple months. During May and June and July, with all the stuff that are happening that were happening and are still actually happening in the Sheikh Jarrah and in Gaza and in Silwan, etc., which are areas in Palestine. And talking about the Sheikh Jarrah, actually, they are refugees that were kicked out of their houses in 1948, then came and settled in Jerusalem, and now they are also again being forcefully displaced out of their houses. So we are that generation, so I think it's more of the fact that you would think that we would have an identity crisis, but it's that we know our identity more than anyone. And it is extremely beautiful because I personally believe that we are the generation that are actually gonna fight for every bit of our land. We are the only generation that are not compromising. We are the generation that do not imagine a free Palestine without every single refugee that was kicked out of Palestine to return to their houses, because the right of return is the main thing that the liberation of Palestine is built on. And I'll just end this with the quote of Teta Yusra again, ما بتمد دية وراها مطالب, no right ever dies, where there are people demanding for it, and we will never ever stop demanding for our rights, and never even demanding for the right of return and every single right that is being violated from us.
Ahsanti, Janna. Thank you so much for that really uplifting and inspirational sort of histories and stories of this great Yusra. Surely Palestine's freedom is a reality because of this resilience and because of the steadfastness. I think we all wish we met Teta Yusra and we all knew her, but there are countless Teta Yusras in the history and currently existing today and manifested within the spirit of the younger generation. And what you said also made me think that it's the reality that Israel is not only, seizing that best land and seizing those resources, as you described, through the annexation of the territories and, giving themselves false authority over the land that they have been doing since 1948. But ultimately, the occupying regime is striving to create these kinds of unbearable conditions for the Palestinians living within it, as you highlighted, such that they become hopeless and they would want to immigrate and they would want to abandon their homelands themselves. Like that seems to be what they're getting at, right? But you've very eloquently described the resolve and the resilience of the Palestinian nation. Thank you so much, Janna, for that. Highly inspirational. Up next, we have Mariam Afifi. So Mariam Afifi is a Palestinian activist and a musician who is a member at the Palestine Youth Orchestra. She recently was arrested whilst actually protesting the ethnic cleansing that was taking part in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem. That's how she gained traction. And the videos showing her arrest also became viral. Another one of my great heroines. Mariam, welcome. It's great to have you.
Hi, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, my love. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. So my name is Mariam Afifi. I am from occupied Jerusalem. So as we are talking about the Palestinian refugees today, I would start by talking and going back to the past and to talk about the very beginning, and that's by attributing the problem of the Palestinian cause and the problem of the Palestinian refugees to the birth of the Zionist movement back in the 19th century. That's the main project for the Zionist movement that was created in the 19th century was to establish a national Jewish home in Palestine. The story of us Palestinians started at this point when we had to face systematic and strategic colonialism. The Zionist movement had to fulfill its project through the occupation of Palestine and through the expulsion of its indigenous people and through replacing its indigenous people with other new incomers. Maybe not all of you know, but the first waves of Zionist immigration to Palestine started in 1882, so around more than 50 years before the Nakba. So in order to understand today's Palestinian issues, what Palestinians go through everywhere around Palestine, their legal statuses and issues, and the refugees case, we have to keep in mind that our story began long before 1948. The Zionist project began in Europe as a European project that was and still is accepted among most of the European governments. So for it to end and for it to be dismantled, the people of these countries should push their governments to let go of it. It's not our fight alone as Palestinians, because we as Palestinians are doing our part in resisting and fighting the occupation daily since, I will not say 1948, but 1891, when the first Palestinians, they revolted against the waves of Zionist immigration. So that was in 1891. We have been fighting since that day. Governments and people of these countries, I'm talking about the USA, even Eastern countries like China, European countries, they should stop distancing themselves from what's going on in Palestine, claiming that it's an Arab-Jewish conflict and that every time you meet someone from these countries, they would tell you, oh, why don't you just make peace? especially that this colonial project is still ongoing until today. It's not something in the past. The Nakba, which, as you know, commemorates the genocides and the forced displacement of Palestinians, is still ongoing until today. The waves of Jewish people from around the world are still coming to Palestine, and Palestinians in many communities all around Palestine are still facing ethnic cleansing. There's still Palestinian refugees until today, they are becoming refugees until today. One Israeli leader once said after the 1948 Nakba that the biggest mistake Israel has done was to spare the Palestinians left after 1948. It is important to mention that today Israel is the only state that is based upon religion. If a Muslim goes to Saudi Arabia's airport and asks for the Saudi passport, they won't give them one. If a Hindu goes to an Indian airport and asks for an Indian passport, they won't give them one. But if a person whose great grandfather or grandmother goes to an Israeli airport and provides papers that his great grandmother was Jewish, he will definitely get the Israeli passport, even if he's coming from, I don't know, Jupiter. So I don't know. I do respect all religious feelings, but should these feelings justify the occupation? Should it justify the killing of people, the stealing of the lands, the forgery of the past, the present, and the future? As we Palestinians fear that a day will come that we will not be able to call ourselves Palestinians anymore, or to refer to our place as Palestine. If you open any map today, digital or paper, as much as you would search, you will not find the name Palestine. We are being erased from the maps, as well as from any international platform, social media, or document. We are being erased, and they fight for us not to exist. So again, since the creation of the Zionist movement, the plan was as follows: the annexation of the land and the displacement of the Palestinian people. Until today, it hasn't stopped, neither in Jerusalem nor in other places around Palestine, like مسافر Yatta. And I really want to emphasize on how brutal it is in مسافر Yatta, and other places like Beta, and even outside Palestine, like the Golan Heights. The Israeli master plan for Jerusalem, as I'm from Jerusalem, so I would talk about the master plan in Jerusalem, is expressed in many master plans, Israeli master plans, laws, and actions. Talking about Jerusalem specifically, the first thing they did when they occupied Jerusalem is drawing new lines and borders for what should be considered Jerusalem and what should fall under the Jerusalem municipality. And in drawing these lines, they decided, first of all, not to include too many Palestinian residents in the annexed areas, even if historically these areas were considered Jerusalemite and they are a few kilometers away from the old city, like the village of Al-Izariya. The annexation and expansion wall that was constructed 15 years ago to cut off the West Bank from the 1948 occupied land, it serves this goal. And I would prefer to mention that the West Bank was created as ghetto-like places to keep Palestinians in, to imprison Palestinians in, and Gaza as well. If you have a look at the root of the wall, the way it is built, you will see how literally their main goal is to include as much land and to exclude as many Palestinians. In Ras Al Amud, which is a village in Jerusalem, the wall has literally excluded Palestinian houses from their garden yards. Villages like El Walaj, southern of Jerusalem, are surrounded completely by the wall, denying the villagers from any piece of land which affects their economic status as villagers, and denying them from having access to any urban center. The second thing they did is to give the Palestinians in Jerusalem a special legal status, as we are considered residents but not citizens. And our residency is permanent, which means that every 5 years, if we couldn't prove that our life is centered in Jerusalem, that we go to schools in Jerusalem, we work in Jerusalem, we live in Jerusalem, we will lose the status and be displaced out of Jerusalem. So it just shows how refugees case is still ongoing. I personally know many Palestinians who lost their what we call a Jerusalem ID, and they became refugees. The Jerusalem ID that we have, it literally has a deadline. It applied the Israeli law in the eastern side of the city, even if according to international law, it is considered an occupied territory, which means it became easier for the Israeli government to displace Palestinians from Jerusalem legally. So talking about Jerusalem mainly, the Israeli Minister of Interior sets its demographic goal for Jerusalem at 70% Israeli. This means getting the growing number of Palestinians to move out of the city. Today, Palestinians in Jerusalem are 39% of the population. So maybe you always hear about house demolitions in Jerusalem, but you don't know why. You all heard about what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah, what's going on in Silwan. Since 1967 until today, 1967 is the day when they occupied the West Bank and the eastern part of Jerusalem. Demolitions, so since 1967, demolitions in Jerusalem, not only demolitions, but hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced by ways of home demolitions, discriminatory policies, and other different ways, like raising the prices, raising the taxes. Like in Jerusalem, they would tax us for anything. From the beginning, the occupation implemented colonial policies of displacement, land confiscations, and other confiscation and other ways. So what's happening today in Sheikh Jarrah and what's happening in Silwan is part of all of this. They want to get us out by any means possible. It's ongoing since, as I said, the creation of the Zionist movement. If their main ways like in before 1948 and during the Nakba was through killing and murdering Palestinians, it's still happening today. But today their main system is that they use their judiciary system that is inherently colonial, and in doing so they won't care about international laws that state that people living in occupied territories have protected status, that they should not be transferred out or in. As I said before, we as Palestinians are doing our part in resisting and fighting the occupation while being constantly silenced, and most of our intellectuals and youth are put in prison. Most of the people that were staying in Sheikh Jarrah, especially back in May and June, July, they are now in prison. We as Palestinians are doing our part in resisting, in dreaming of getting back to Palestine, Palestine that is uncolonized, that we are dreaming that all the Palestinian refugees to come back home. And I have to mention that today the Palestinian refugees and internally displaced people constitute the largest and longest standing unresolved case of refugees and displaced persons in the world. What adds to this case is that it's still ongoing, and that until today Palestinians are still forced off their lands, as I have mentioned before. This contributes to the ever increasing number of refugees, like of Palestinian refugees. We should realize and understand that dreams of return for the Palestinian people are only dreams as long as the Zionist colonialism continues and its existence is legitimized and accepted by countries around the world. And yeah, thank you. That's what I wanted to say. I want to emphasize on the importance of education and the importance of culture, like of talking to people about Palestine, telling stories about Palestine, like what Janna was saying, because as I said before, they are trying to erase us, erase our existence. I've been in Europe a lot, and every time I say I'm from Palestine, people won't realize where is Palestine. If older generations around the world knew what Palestine is today, the new generations, they don't know about it because basically they are erasing us. So we should keep talking about Palestine every time, every way possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mariam. Very, very powerful exposition there. I particularly like the fact that you began by speaking about the origins of the Nakba and the origins of the actualization of the Zionist project, because at times that kind of gets hidden behind the screen. So this understanding that, of course, the Zionists were effectively hunters for sources of power in the world that could actualize their vision of a Jewish homeland, and wherever the imperialists place the Zionists, they will follow. And the idea that the Zionists reached their targets through facilitating the interests of the imperialist Britain at that time. Hence, those in Britain have an even greater responsibility of speaking up about this and reversing this biggest shame to have occurred, as you described, was materialized in the Balfour Declaration. And it's also interesting, that's why if we look back at the founding protocols of the Zionists, we see that initially there was this discussion over the creation of a Jewish homeland, even in British East Africa. This was suggested by the founding father of Zionism, Theodore Herzl, in 1903. But Britain wasn't happy at that time because it considered that it wouldn't serve its interests by having that colonial project there. So this idea that the Zionists were playthings at the hands of the imperialists and continue to be driven by them is very, very important in centering and understanding that pressure needs to be applied on the imperialists ultimately to forego sustaining the colonial state. Thank you so much for that, Mariam. It's very, very insightful.
I remembered something. I want to mention it, is that we're seeing now the beauty, I don't know what you call it, words, beauty, whatever. So
yes, Miss Universe.
Because these people don't have culture. We've seen photos of them wearing Palestinian thobes and eating Palestinian, basically talking about the Palestinian culture as it is Israeli. So they are stealing every aspect of our existence, contributed to themselves, and basically erasing us. So
absolutely,
we should fight our eraser. And I just remembered because today I saw the photos of them wearing the thobes that our great grandmothers used to wear since hundreds of years, and now suddenly it's theirs.
Precisely. I mean, you can't even call it cultural appropriation. It's so much more worse than that, because it's not even like they're imitating what's Israeli culture, because, I mean, effectively, what even is that, right? Absolutely. Very relevant points there. And this idea that the soft war is even more dangerous than the hard war itself, that soft war through trying to inherently erase the culture of a people. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mariam. Up next, we have Enas Ghannam. So Enas Ghannam is a holder of a bachelor's degree in English, professional diploma in translation, and a master's in translation. She's a project manager of the We Are Not Numbers program. This program was originally founded to tell the stories behind those who were killed or injured by Israeli occupation forces. It tells the stories of Palestine from the mouths of Palestinians across the globe. Enas is originally a refugee from Nablus, and she worked as a teacher at UNRWA schools for a few years. Her ambition is to help the Palestinian people, the Palestinian youth specifically, to achieve their goals and to ultimately become emancipated. By freedom, she doesn't only mean living in a free state without the actual state occupation or having the freedom to move or travel safety, but in her own words, she means freedom to express their opinions, to think in a way that can help Palestine become a better place for themselves and for their children in the future. Enas, welcome. It's so great to have you.
Welcome. Thank you so much for this.
Absolute pleasure. Please, the floor is yours.
Let me start. Salam, everyone. I'm really honored to have the chance to be here with you today to represent a generation that is fighting a lot to return. Let me first introduce myself again and what I do. My name is Enas Ghannam, the project manager for We Are Not Numbers, a project of the Euromed Human Rights Monitor. This project was first founded in 2015 to tell the stories behind the dead and the injured in Palestine, particularly in Gaza. It started after the 2014 aggression on the Strip in an attempt to show the world that those who are living in the Strip are human beings who have their own lives and stories. However, I believe that this project has already started a long time ago, back when our ancestors were living in their lands peacefully before being forced to leave everything behind them and escape for their souls. It is cold in here tonight. Thank you. Thank God, Alhamdulillah. Now we have our own home to hide in from the storms. But I wonder how it was like for the refugees who were forced to leave their homes back in 1948, or for those who are still suffering from the consequences of the Nakba. Thinking of my grandmother who was forced to leave her home, I can imagine how it was like for her, the daughter of a rich family, to find herself suddenly living in a tent with nothing in her hand to count on. Her whole world was turned upside down in one night when the news came that all the people in Jaffa and in Nablus and the neighboring cities have to leave for 2 days or 2 weeks maximum. She didn't know back then, when she hid her gold and money somewhere in her house, that she's not coming back. She didn't imagine that when she was collecting her clothes and her children's clothes, closing the door behind her, that she was actually closing a page in her life to start a whole new life right from the scratch. She didn't think that from that moment on, she, her children, and their children are going to have the word refugee next to their names for the rest of their lives. My father, may he rest in peace, was only 5 back then, but he remembered clearly how his mother was holding his hand and running away from explosions and smokes, which was covering everything around them while they were heading to the sea. Perhaps the scene has also brought to the memory the scenes of waves of people leaving Shujaiya or fleeing the destructions of their buildings during the latest 2014 and 2021 aggressions on the Strip. During that, they were moving to UNRWA schools, seeking refugees from the Israeli occupation attack, in an image that shows how children are living the same situation again, as if history is repeating itself. For more than 70 years, Palestinian refugees are still not recognized their rights of return. Until this moment, there are people who are still living in camps such as Jabalia camp, the beach camp, and many others. Until this moment, people are being classified according to being refugees or citizens. Not only this, according to the Palestinian, let me see this. Not only this, according to the Palestinian NGOs network, PNGO, more than 70% of the population in the Gaza Strip are refugees, which bears the occupation full responsibility for the crisis and problems that the Strip has been experiencing for more than 70 years, ever since the influx of more than 197,000 refugees since the establishment of the Israeli occupation alleged state in 1948. After the Israeli aggressions, I was asked many times if I want to leave Gaza and Palestine for good. And I was not very sure how to answer this question until very recently. I mean, Gaza is the only place I know. It is my home. But I also want my dreams to come true. I want to be able to move freely, to travel wherever and whenever I want. I want to be able to live in peace. I don't want to hear explosions, strikes, or hear about the death and injury of people everywhere I go. I don't want to be worried about the people I love all the time, wherever I go. I want the simplest rights, the ability to live the life the way I want it to be. So does that mean I want to leave? Our ancestors fought a lot trying to bring us back home. We are living this hard life now because they did not give up our right to return. In Gaza, we lived all kinds of injustice, only for being Palestinians. We went through 4 fierce aggressions on the Strip, and yet we survived. And we will always survive because this is the only thing we master and can do. So, the answer is no. I and everyone in my age and all my generation don't want to leave. Yes, we want to continue our education abroad. Yes, we want to improve our lives and to make sure that our children don't live the life we were forced to live. But it is still our moral responsibility to keep going. We happen to be the generation that had it all. We have the burden of carrying the legacy of our ancestors to keep fighting for the lands. And we are burdened to deliver the same message to our children and their children until one generation succeeds to bring us back home. It could be this generation who will do this, it could be the next. But eventually, we will return simply because our cause is a just cause. So, yes, We Are Not Numbers is a project which started a long time ago because each one of us has a story to tell. Our ancestors managed to get their stories to us verbally, and we will continue to tell their stories and ours till we succeed to get our right back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ines. I mean, as each of you speaks so richly and with so much substance, I mean, I can't help but feel that, it's not even an exaggeration to say that, the biggest shame throughout humanity to have occurred is this very catastrophe in Palestine, given the fact that it is ongoing, given also the unique nature of this aggression of a kind that is a settler colonial conspiracy project. It was the biggest of its kind in history, that was founded by the global hegemonic ruling system solely to serve their interests. And as you rightly mentioned, not only is this crime ongoing, but the right of return is ultimately the minimum that can be established to correct that biggest shame to have occurred, and that shouldn't remain at any costs. Thank you so much, Ines. Finally, our last speaker is Nerdine Kiswani. Nerdine is a Palestinian organizer from New York. She's the founder and chair of Within Our Lifetime, United for Palestine. It's a community-based Palestinian-led organization whose goal is to revitalize the revolutionary spirit of the Palestinian community abroad in pursuit of a free homeland. She's also a second-year law student at CUNY School of Law, where she organizes with students for justice in Palestine. It's an absolute honor to have you, Nerdine.
It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for introducing me and for having me be a part of this panel amongst all of these amazing, brave, resilient, so eloquently spoken Palestinian women, including yourself. I know Palestinian women were also part of organizing this. And I also want to mention a bunch of us, of the speakers already spoke about their grandmothers. And I came in here planning to speak about my grandmother as well. So it just shows how much Palestinian women have been part of the struggle and leading the struggle in many ways. So it's such an honor to be here. I said this to some of the speakers earlier before we were live, but I just feel like I know all of them. I've seen and heard speeches, videos from these brave women for a long time now. Some of them, like Janna Jihad, who we've seen ever since she was a little girl, and now I'm learning from her more and more on these types of events. People like Mariam Afifi, who showed us what true bravery is, and of course Enas as well, living in Gaza. So it's just amazing to be here. I'm a third-year law student now. I think I spoke for you guys for the Palestinian Return Center. when I was a 2L, but I'm in my third year. So hopefully I'll finish soon. I'm actually in the middle of finals right now. And I just want to start by talking a little bit about myself and then go into a broader picture, because all of the speakers before me were amazing, insightful. Again, it's an honor for me to be here, and I don't want to repeat much of what anyone said, but maybe just add on to it. It's amazing how many things we were going to speak about similarly, just from, the experience of being a Palestinian. So again, I relate to and echo every single thing every speaker has said without exaggeration. I'm originally from Beit Iksa, which was part of Jerusalem before they decided that it went to the Diffeh, or the West Bank. Like what Mariam was speaking about, certain villages that are originally considered Jerusalem but aren't considered that to the Zionist occupation. And to give an idea of what this looks like in real life, my grandmother was born in 1938, 10 years before the state of Israel was established, and her passport says her birthplace is Jerusalem. But my father, her son, who was born in the 60s, has West Bank as his birthplace on his passport. They were both born in the same village and in the same exact house. None of them have Palestinian ID now, and they became refugees in Jordan. Our family has only been able to visit easily since getting US citizenship. I've personally been to Palestine 3 times in my life. The last time was in 2014 during Israel's bombardment of Gaza. I went with my grandmother, Teta Saeed, and this is the last time that we both ever went. And, like I said, Janna and other people spoke about grandmothers, and it reminded me so much of that time. And my grandmother especially, because earlier this year, my grandmother died. She passed away here in Brooklyn. And that was the last time we went to Palestine together in 2014. She's one of my main inspirations for fighting for Palestine. She wrote poetry. She taught me about Najil Ali and Kanafani and Palestinian history. She would often, read her poems, which were about Palestine, and it would bring everyone in the room to tears. One of the biggest heartbreaks that I'll have to live with forever is that we all have to live with, is the fact that she experienced the Nakba directly, and she was never able to fully return to her homeland to live there. Many of the Nakba generation is currently experiencing this, and we're seeing it happen. There are still many people who are alive from the Nakba generation, but they're getting much older, and that part of Palestinian history where someone spoke about this earlier, they never thought that they were closing the chapter on an entire life. And now those stories, that history that they lived through, we have to preserve them, because we don't want it to go with them. And we want to be able to liberate Palestine within their lifetime. This is part of the reason that I call it within our lifetime. I know that for them, for people like my grandmother, she wasn't able to have that. But I know that they would all be proud and happy for their descendants to be able to realize that reality and realize that struggle. So although I was in Jerusalem and the West Bank the last time I went there, and Gaza was getting bombed, this impacted all of Palestine. During my stay in Jerusalem, I was shot at with stun grenades. I was harassed daily. I had my items confiscated from me by Israeli soldiers. But every part of Palestine, from the fertile land, the rich culture, and the resilient people, was still as welcoming as ever, and instills the belief that this is a struggle worth fighting for, and this is a struggle that we will win. Of course, Israel has caught on to people, and especially Palestinian youth abroad, feeling the sentiment, and began increasingly denying entry to Palestinians, even those with US passports like me, officially denying me entry to my own homeland in 2015 for what they cited as hostile behavior towards Israel. That's literally what it said on the paper that they gave me. This attempt to discourage and silence me, along with anyone else who speaks out against Israel, has only made us fight stronger and harder. And this makes me more angry than it does sad, because I know that I'm not alone. Millions of Palestinian refugees are denied the right to return to their own homes by Israel. And the only reason I could visit in the first place is my US citizenship. So I don't want to individually realize this ability for me to go back to my homeland as just one person. I want to go back when we can all go back. since the Nakba or the catastrophe, which which Mariam said began in 1948 but did not end then, and it didn't end in 1948, as we see Sheikh Jarrah, we see even villages like mine, Betiksa, just a few years ago, they're confiscating additional land from it. Some of these villages, some of these stories you'll hear about in the news, and some you just won't. But this didn't end with 1948, when the Zionist armed groups ethnically cleansed over 500 Palestinian villages and expelled about 800,000 of the indigenous population to establish the so-called State of Israel. This is what caused the widespread displacement of the Palestinian people, both internally and abroad. And again, like someone said before me, Palestinian refugees make up the largest and oldest refugee population in the world, with over 10 million Palestinian refugees worldwide. And refugees are not just the ones that the United Nations decides to, consider refugees or not. We are American citizens now, but we were kicked off of our land in Palestine, and we want to go there and we can't go there. So we will classify ourselves as refugees as well, because it was not our choice to get removed off of our land. It was not our choice to have our land stolen by a Zionist colonizing entity. So to this day, Palestinians are fighting for the right to return to their homeland. In Gaza, the isolated strip of Palestinian land that's cut off from their own people in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, which we are all cut off from one another. As Enas mentioned, most of the Palestinians in Gaza are actually refugees who are from cities and in towns and what is stolen Palestinian land, now known as Israel. When we talk about the fact that Gaza doesn't have electricity for 18 hours a day, when we talk about the fact that 95% of the water is undrinkable, when there is unemployment, when there is constant bombardment, and they make it seem like there's no solution, when the solution could be solved in 20 minutes, because many of those Palestinians live 20 minutes away by a car ride to a village that is now being inhabited by Zionist colonizers, a village that they were kicked out of. So we could easily solve it if we allowed the right of return. And only with reparations, land back, return, and the international solidarity will there ever be justice. And I also want to uplift the concept of return in a different way, because it's not just Palestinians who are living that are fighting for the right to return. Some of you may be familiar with Makabir al-Arqam, which is an organization that demands the return of Palestinian bodies, Palestinian loved ones who have been killed by the Israeli army, who have been killed by Israeli soldiers, and their bodies are not given back to their family for them to bury. So for decades, this has been going on. Israel has denied our Palestinian families the right to bury our loved ones. Despite numerous attempts to return our children, Israel continues to hold their remains hostage as ransom for political gains. So families of martyrs, activists, and supporters have been calling on people around the world to stand with Palestinians and demand their children back, just so that they may be able to bury them. And for Palestinians, the history of our people lies not only in the defense of our land, but also our struggle to return to it. On March 30th, 2018, when the Great Return March was launched, Israeli forces responded by raining down tear gas and toxic chemicals on the protesters, and Israeli snipers murdered 15 Palestinians in cold blood on just the first day alone. It initially planned to last for just 6 weeks, from Land Day to Nakba Day, but it ended up lasting up to 637 days, just under 2 years, and it only even ended then because COVID started happening. So during this time, nearly 300 Palestinians were martyred by occupation forces, including medics, journalists, disabled people, women and children. And while the Great Return March was put on pause at the beginning of 2020 and the world went into quarantine, the call of return has only grown since then. We know that a liberated Palestine means the liberation of our lands and the implementation of our right to return and our self-determination. And we honor those who were martyred while trying to return and while fighting for our land by recommitting ourselves to prioritizing the implementation of the basic right of Palestinians to return safely and immediately to their original homes and land, within our lifetime. I also want to talk a little bit about the importance of international solidarity for our allies, people who say that they stand with Palestinian liberation. You cannot stand or say that you support Palestine if you do not support the full right of return for every single Palestinian. Again, that is not solidarity if you don't support that. How can we discuss Palestinian rights when a majority of Palestinians don't even get to live in Palestine, when a huge number of Palestinians don't get to visit in Palestine? So if you don't talk about the right of return, then that means you don't actually support Palestinian rights. And we know that the advances of one revolutionary struggle objectively strain the resources of oppressor nations like Israel and like the US, its biggest funder. And they subjectively inspire anti-imperialist struggles around the world by proving that these struggles are possible in practice. So it's very important for different groups to come together, share our strategies, lessons, experience with each other to build off of our struggles and understand that it's necessary for liberation. Our demand is clear, and it is summarized in one word, the word that we are all echoing here today: return. We will return to take back what has been stripped from us by imperialism and Zionism. We will return despite US imperialism and Zionist settler colonialism trying to stop us. We will return to our homes, not only in Ramallah, Khan Yunis, and Beit Iksa, but in Jerusalem and Yafa, Haifa, and Akka. And as migrants and refugees, we will drive out imperialism, return to our homelands, and build a new society based on justice and dignity. The ability for the Palestinian people to create a future free from colonial domination is directly related to the ability of people in the US and around the world to create such a society. So people fighting for their own liberation must understand that it is incomplete without Palestinian liberation. And our return is not just a movement of human beings from one geographic place to another. Our return will not be a footnote in a United Nations report or a statistic in the next human rights documentary. The Palestinian return means revolution by any means necessary, a revolution not just for the Palestinian and Arab people, but a confrontation with the imperialist machine that stomps out the life of people from Latin America to Africa to Palestine, Yemen, and Syria. Our return makes the road more paved for the indigenous people of this world to return to their homes. And the cutting of the chains from Black, indigenous, and oppressed people worldwide means that the chain will be easier for us to cut around ours as well. They can shoot us, bomb us, starve us, blockade us, strangle our economies, poison our land, not allow us to return, cut our olive trees down in Palestine. But we have demonstrated as Palestinian people for decades of colonial plundering cannot stop the resistance of our people. Our people's history shows nothing less than the fact that while they can do all of that to us, it has never and will never stop us from taking back what is rightfully ours. Thank you.
Ahsanti, Nerdeen, such powerful words right there. And I think everything that you dear ladies are saying is actually proof and testament to how Palestine's liberation is imminent, because when you have such resilient voices and such a resilient and steadfast soul, no doubt that is enough to freak the Zionists out, I guess. And as you were speaking about the brutality of the occupying regime, it came to my mind how this occupying regime actually justifies that brutality. And of course, it does this through sheer dehumanization, of the Palestinians in their totality. I mean, in the same way that we see, for example, Muslims being branded as terrorists, this important, psychological precondition that is created, especially amongst the Western masses, in order for the West to ultimately further wars in these countries. And once you take away a people's humanity, those casualties and those murders do not seem to equate. I mean, it's interesting when the deputy foreign minister of Israel was confronted about the murder of the Palestinian nurse Razan al-Najjar that was very viral in 2018, that was part of the great marches of return. He said, we don't know if she, as a nurse, might have had a bomb strapped to her. He literally said that in one of his interviews. So it just highlights the fact that by default of being a Palestinian, you're a terrorist, so we need to kill them all, right? Like that's the kind of justification that the Zionist regime puts forward. And that dehumanization of Palestinians has reached a stage where if we wish to highlight the atrocities that are being committed, we find it's not even enough to give a high death toll. Like it's not enough to say 100 civilians were killed, men, women, and children. It's like you almost have to search for images of babies being torn into pieces and completely charred in the bid to garner this kind of sympathy. And this has only been made possible due to the US superpowers and its allies anchoring the wrong state, which is Israel, and their control of the mainstream media narrative that has ultimately normalized this. We have 20 minutes left, so I want to go straight into the questions and answers. The first question that I want to ask is actually related to the Intifada of Al-Aqsa in May this year that has really opened the eyes of the international community to what is happening in Palestine, of course, alongside the help of social media. Not thanks to mass media, but social media, and that kind of grassroots activism. The Intifada of Al-Aqsa, it signified the centrality of Al-Quds and Jerusalem as the focal point of the Palestinian struggle, where, even Gaza was brutally attacked for standing up for the sanctity of Al-Quds. And we saw a united front from across all of historic Palestine. We saw Palestinians that were even living within the 48 borders who began mobilizing. They formed a local front within the occupying colonial regime. Perhaps if any one of our speaker would like to explain the significance of this unity within historic Palestine, why this was a threat and why that became an uncalculated source of fear for the occupying regime. I mean, Janna, if you might want to start, or any other speaker.
Yeah, totally. I would love to. I will personally speak from a youth perspective, because I believe that this uprising was actually youth-led, and it was extremely beautiful for us, because, as you said, it was a unified uprising. We literally had demonstrations in Ramallah, we had demonstrations in Nabi Saleh, we had demonstrations in Lid, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, everywhere we had demonstrations at the same time, continuously for days. And it was the time where we actually came to the conclusion that with us being united, we have so much power, and we actually can control the situation and can actually cause so many changes. And it was extremely beautiful because, we had strikes, we had so many activities, literally every day, every night. We would have protests we talked about so many issues. At a certain point, we also had connected what was going on in America with the police brutalization against African Americans. We actually had protests in Ramallah, connecting both of our struggles. And I think it was a threat for the Israeli occupation, because realizing how much power we have is always a threat for them. Any type of resistance, and any form of resistance coming in, literally from any person, is a threat for them. And imagine all the youth of Palestine just protesting all at once. And everyone is being more aware. Everyone is filming and posting stuff on social media. Everyone's talking about Sheikh Jarrah in Palestine. Everyone is covering everything and what's going on. At a certain point, wallah, like at a certain point we had a protest in Nabi Saleh, and it was the time where we had protests everywhere. So there was literally no soldiers, no Israeli soldiers. We like on the main street of Nabi Saleh, when we marched down the main street, singing and chanting and holding flags and whatever. The Israeli occupation forces would usually be like right in the middle of the street and would start suppressing the protesters and shooting at us and whatever. But we reached the gate of Nabi Saleh. That means like we reached the last point of Nabi Saleh without any soldier being there. There were no soldiers left. Everyone was, so it was amazing. We had so much power, and I think it was revolutionary in our history and even to ourselves personally. And it made us actually find ourselves in a way and, understand ourselves more. Yeah, I loved it.
Can I add something?
Yes, please, Mariam.
Okay. Answering your question, I do believe that Israel for so long has been using the fragmentation policy in order to weaken us Palestinians. We were fragmented and shattered inside and outside Palestine. We were no longer a nation. It created out of us Palestinians shattered communities living in ghetto-like cities in the West Bank, in Gaza, or in the diaspora. We were not only fragmented geographically, our realities were fragmented as well. So my experience and reality as a Palestinian from Jerusalem differs, for example, differs than the experience from the Palestinians living in Gaza or the Palestinians living in the West Bank. So, or even the Palestinian livings in the lands that were stolen and occupied in 1948. So basically, what happened back in May, we as if fought this fragmentation policy. It's for the first time we were seen as a one nation fighting for freedom. We're not fighting for equality. We're not fighting for peace, as the world tries to, to talk about us. Yeah, they want peace. No, we don't want peace. We want freedom. That's the main question. And another thing is that the Israeli occupation has long been counting on its ability to silence us Palestinians and to silence the international community that supports Palestinians, especially when it comes to the crimes it practices against us. So it has long been sieging our voices, our stories, and they were occupying and are still occupying the powerful news platforms around the world, spreading its propaganda. So it did not expect that we, the Palestinians, without any support, could reach the world through our different social media platforms, showing the world what's taking place here through our own eyes, voices, and the cameras in our phones. And I want to emphasize on something is that do not minimize the power of social media. When back in May I was arrested because I went viral through all social media platforms, it helped to reduce the penalty. Many Palestinians were arrested and are being arrested not in front of cameras. Until today, they are still in prison. No one are talking about their rights. No one are talking about them. So I feel I was, how to say it, I had luck somehow because I was, someone had a camera, they had a phone, someone took a video and the video went viral. It's just about luck. So don't minimize the power of social media. It's our own way as Palestinians and supporters of Palestinians to show our stories and to tell the world what happens to us from our own point of view.
I'd like to add what Mariam said.
Please, Enas.
Yeah. So let me just draw the picture to you while we were in Gaza and everything was happening to us, and we were just for the first time we were just waiting for nothing actually, because we didn't know what's going to happen. We are used to have aggressions like this. The last aggression continued for 51 days and nothing happened. So at that time, at the very beginning of this aggression, and I keep insisting not to use the word war because it was not a war, it was an aggression, it was an attack on us, on the Gazans,
one-sided, absolutely.
the civilians. So it was, we were waiting, we were desperate, we didn't know what is going to happen. So suddenly, all of a sudden, when we started to hear like things are happening in the West Bank and then the diaspora in Jordan, and people are actually are moving in London, in Europe, everywhere there was a movement, and you can imagine how good that was, how positive that this was on us, because at that time, I remember that very day. I was at home. My whole family came. We gathered at home. We were hearing the explosions everywhere. The drones were attacking us. We could hear the explosions everywhere. But at that time, they only feel everyone, like the children themselves, everyone were feeling victory. I know it wouldn't feel so, but we felt like we have a backup. There are people who are considering, they are thinking of us for the first time. I'm telling you that this was like the first time we have this feeling that the world is actually listening and supporting us. Also, when the Facebook or the Instagram campaign happened, when people stopped using the Instagram because I'm sorry, the Facebook, because Facebook was abandoning us from writing about what's happening here in Gaza. This was very supportive. Also, the Instagram, it was a good thing. It was really good. I mean, the idea of raising your hand or standing up for the good thing, to stand for the right. Please do not belittle it, because you are making us feel much better, and you make us feel more supportive and more powerful. That yes, we want to continue. Now we know that there are other people who believe in us. There are other people who will remember us if anything happened to us. So thanks for everyone who just stand for us.
Absolutely.
I'll also add, just it's amazing hearing from all the different contexts regarding unity, and I'll speak from our context. Also adding that seeing Palestinians abroad, whether it's in Lebanon and Jordan, trying to break the borders, all of the Palestinians united in Palestine. In other places like here in New York City, the biggest protests that I have ever been to or seen in my life, and I've been to many protests for many different causes, was actually the protests for Palestine that happened this summer. You know, it didn't just unite Palestinians in Palestine, but Palestinian organizations outside and other people who support the Palestinian struggle. It was also an advancement of Palestinian discourse. Oftentimes, a lot of organizations here did, and some of them still do, try to place restrictions on how we speak for the Palestinian cause,
Yes.
Try to undermine things like Palestinian resistance, when we know that Palestinian resistance is the only reason that we're still alive, that we still exist, right? When this moment came, they couldn't deny the importance of Palestinian resistance, and that all Palestinians are unified in supporting that resistance. In fact, here in New York City, and Janna Jihad knows Nancy, she's an amazing Palestinian organizer from here. She was chanting at the beginning of the protest on the streets of New York, "Ana ma'al muqawama," which means I am with the resistance. And the entire crowd erupted and repeated that same phrase back and forth 10 times. People on the streets of New York City who were once afraid of being surveilled and trapped, called terrorists, all of these different things, because of course the NYPD spies on Muslims and accuses us of all these things, were being unafraid for the first time in a collective, strong voice, supporting Palestinian resistance in all of its forms.
Thank you so much, Nerdine. Absolutely. I just wanted to pick up on one point that Mariam made, and it's this notion that, you know, we're not actually looking for peace. We want freedom. It's this understanding that freedom is the prerequisite for peace. The notion of peace, I feel, has been lethally used to undermine the Palestinian struggle for justice and to kind of act as a pacifier, to tell the Palestinians to basically, you know, just shut up and accept the inhumane brutalization that they're subjected to. For you guys, I want to ask you the question of what has history showed us about the outcome of normalizing ties with the occupying regime? And why is it unconscionable to frame peace as coexistence with the occupying entity? I know that's quite a hefty question and we have about 7 minutes. So if you can just limit your answers to maybe 1.5 minutes. We can start with you, Nerdine, or with anyone else.
I'll just start quickly with, you know, anti-normalization is one of the 4 points of unity that anybody needs to have in order to be a part of within our lifetime or work within our lifetime, or any Palestinian group. It is one of the tenets of Palestinian solidarity, and it's not a new concept. This is something that has been in place since 1948, even discouraging religious leaders coming to Palestine if they are working with the Zionist occupation or speaking with them in any way. But we know that imperialism uses tools like whether it's offering Egypt U.S. aid, which is the second largest recipient of aid in the world after Israel from the United States, which is not a mistake, simply so they could have this fake peace treaty, which we know doesn't represent the majority or even close to a small percentage of Egyptians even. We know that these governments don't represent their people. And in fact, they're just announcing themselves as people who will be remembered in the dustbin of history. These are efforts that, although they may be announced publicly only recently, we've known that, these Arab leaders have turned their back on their own people for a long time and have turned their back on the Palestinian struggle. So now they've exposed themselves, and we have every right to condemn them as much as possible. And history will condemn those people. So I'll leave it at that to leave space for others.
Ahsanti. Would anyone else like to pick up on this issue of peace and coexistence with the occupying entity? Why there's efforts to push in that direction?
I mean, what is the definition of peace exactly?
That's a very good question. That's a
Yeah,
very, very good question.
Because if you're saying that peace is my right to live the way I want, without having to hear any explosions, to wake up afraid of anything that would happen to the people I love or to anyone else other than me. I'm not caring a lot about me, but I care about the people I love. So if I have to live this every single day, then how can you say that this is a peace, that you want a coexistence with me? I don't have this. I don't have this this luxury. I don't feel all of
It's
this.
a reality. Absolutely.
Our children don't. They didn't until their children were born in war and aggressions. They lived it. This is the only thing they know about life. Yeah.
It's a very powerful point. Peace is the absence of war and aggression. Please, Janna.
Yeah, true. Even regarding the actual definition of peace for the international world regarding the Palestinian-Israeli issue. When Trump was president during 2017, when he declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, here in the West Bank, we have, I believe, all over Palestine, but specifically in the West Bank, we had actual ongoing demonstrations and strikes where we didn't go to school for a couple of days, and the Israeli occupation forces would stay in the village day and night. We wouldn't sleep. They're literally just in the village and just shooting. So that was the time where it was supposedly they had the agreement and it was supposed to be peaceful and so great. It was actually one of the worst times in Nabi Saleh personally. We had so many injuries every single day. We couldn't sleep. We couldn't do anything. So it totally even peace doesn't really match with their definition of peace. So
yeah. And that's why they're so threatened by armed struggle and armed resistance, right? Because that can really establish peace. Please, Mariam.
Yeah, I just want to add that even the word peace, the way it is said and the way it is seen, it is imposed upon us Palestinians, and it is imposed on our narrative as Palestinians. So I do believe that we need to reshape discourse in order to reshape reality. Especially since the Oslo agreements, until today, the word peace has been used millions of times as if it is the only thing needed. We only need peace to be implemented and everything would be fine. But we as Palestinians, we don't even have freedom to ask for peace, So, I think the way it is implemented, it's only imposed upon us Palestinians. And so this is why we Palestinians now, we have the power to reshape the discourse and to say that it's not peace, it is freedom, it is the right to return. It is the right to be Palestinian, not to be silenced, to create, to bring Palestine again the way it is. So yeah.
Thank you, Mariam.
I'll
Yes.
quickly add, because I missed this part of the question at first, and I echo everything everyone said. It's like if you live in a neighborhood and there's all these different houses with people living in them, and one of the houses, somebody goes in, kills half of the family, kicks the other half out, leaves like a little closet for one person of the family to live in, and they have kids and they're fighting to return to that place. Like, they're screaming, they're protesting to return to their home, and everyone in the neighborhood tells them just to shut up so that we can have a peaceful neighborhood. Like, just go away, forget about the past, go somewhere else, so that we don't hear this fighting and this screaming, and that's peace. That's what peace actually means to them. So yeah, I'll just end it there. It's a ridiculous concept.
And yeah, considering like the world, like, forget about the past, like people still believe in many places that the issue of Palestine is something in the past. But as we keep on saying, it's not in the past. The past is still happening now. It's the present and it's the future. As long as there's occupation, as long as there's colonialism, so colonization. So
when you talk about coexistence, what do you mean? I mean, are we going to be like first citizen and second citizens, like what's happening right now in these 48 lands? This is what's happening, and this is what's going to happen forever.
And it's only going to get worse. Exactly. The Oslo Accords only led to a great amount of land annexation. It was actually the greatest amount of land annexation was during the Oslo Accords. Absolutely. If I could just end by having half a minute from each of you, just maybe looking into the future, what can those in the Palestinian diaspora and also those who are non-Palestinians, as we all have a social responsibility, what can we do to further this cause and to strengthen the Palestinian right to return? If we can start with you, Janna.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the best thing any person could do all over the world, since we're not living in a perfect world, everyone in every single country has some form of colonialism, has some form of injustice, inequality, the capitalism, all that's going on in the world that's actually very interconnected to our struggle as Palestinians against apartheid and also against settler colonialism. So fighting all these injustices and all these forms of colonialism and imperialism in your country totally affects the form that is in Palestine and can totally contribute to the Palestinian issue. So connecting our struggle is one thing we totally have to look more into and work on, because it is extremely important. And also raising awareness about the Palestinian issue, fighting, never, accepting silence and just screaming to just talk about Palestine in every single setting. Whenever you get an opportunity to talk about Palestine, talk about injustice, talk about change. And we don't only need words, we totally need action. And action can come in all forms of ways. It can literally come as simple as a social media post. So yeah, don't settle, don't compromise, and fight and resist.
Ahsanti. Would anyone like to add anything as closing remarks?
I'm actually going to use Muhammad al-Kurd's words. This cause is a just cause. I mean, we are going to win after all, because this is what's going to happen. So I think that the history after in the future is going to write the story of what happened, what's happening, and please be with us, because we need lots of people to support us, to be with us. We need to move. We need to educate ourselves, to educate our children. We need education, basically, to the freedom to move, to be able to express ourselves the way we want, without having the fear of not being heard or silenced, as what's happening right now.
Absolutely.
I can add, I echo again everything everyone said. I think the most important thing first is to be unwavering and uncompromising in your support for Palestinian liberation from the river to the sea. Do not make compromises. Compromises have only regressed our cause, if anything. So we do have to truly believe and organize like we know that Palestine is going to be free, and not in some distant future, but it's in our hands and in our responsibility to free it. And when you believe those things, then you bring Palestine with you everywhere you go, at your workplace, in your schools, in supermarkets, with BDS, any method that you can bring it in. But in order to go into those places, you first have to have a principle that will actually have you represent the struggle and not sell it out, because there are some who claim to speak for Palestine in certain spaces that are compromising on our struggle. And again, echoing what Janna said about connecting struggles, especially for Palestinians who live abroad. Sometimes I feel like one of the reasons this is happening to us is so that we can also go to other spaces and other countries and other people and nations and educate them about what liberation looks like, what fighting for your liberation looks like, how to never give up, and for us to all fight these struggles together. Thank you.
Ahsanti. Mariam, is there anything you'd like to add as closing remarks?
So I just want to say thank you. And as a closing remark, I'd say that resistance has no specific shape. We can resist through any way possible by carrying Palestine, as Nerdeen said, each day and every day, everywhere you go. You can resist through music, you can resist through literature.
As you do so beautifully, yes.
Thank you. So basically, resistance has no shape. Don't stop talking about Palestine. Remember that the most horrific events that happened in history, when they happened, people, they shut their eyes. They didn't talk about it. But let's not let this happen to the Palestinian cause. Let's talk about the Palestinian cause. Let's talk about the freedom of Palestine and about what's happening in Palestine and with Palestinians. I just want to emphasize, I know that occupation and colonization is happening everywhere in Palestine, but I just want to say, please read about the community of Masafer Yatta, southern Hebron, because what they are going through today and every day is very horrible and horrific. Try to read about it. It's called Masafer Yatta. Yeah, thank you.
Ahsantum. We have to really amplify the voices of the Palestinians, especially those voices that are echoing resistance, ultimately. That is key and that is crucial. And this is all despite the price that may be paid in the process. You know, even if that means potentially losing a job, being smeared, whatever it is, just campaigning for the truth because it's on the basis of truth. You are on the right side, ultimately. Thank you so, so much to all our beautiful, dear panelists. You're all inspirational heroines of mine. Nerdeen, Janna, Mariam, and Enas. Thank you so, so much for joining us. And to our viewers as well, thank you so much for tuning in. Please do educate, do read about Palestine, do mobilize. This is a very important cause. This is actually the central cause of all causes. If we liberate Palestine, as Janna alluded to, it's an interconnected struggle. You will see that domino effect with the help of God. Peace, love, solidarity, and unity. Thank you so much.